I don't know if he was foreign minister or justice minister in Israel, one of the authors of the so-called Geneva Initiative. And for a long time, people saw him as a peacenik and very critical of Israel. I met him once, and we were having a discussion. We actually debated the right of return on the Doha debates on BBC television. And I met him, and he was, of course, arguing against the right of return. But I was trying to convince him, you know, I said, you are one of the people who people consider to be a visionary, or, you know, someone with progressive politics to some extent. You should embrace this. You should see that Israel, as a so-called Jewish state, is a dead end. It's not going. So why don't you be in the forefront? Why don't you embrace this? And I was joking with him. I said, maybe we'll make you foreign minister of the new state. I don't have that power, and I don't think I would want to, but it was just a way to pull his leg. But he said very clearly, and it's actually written in his book, he said, if Israel ever stops being a Jewish state, I will leave. I have no interest in it if it stops being a Jewish state. And at that point I said to him, I said, Mr. Balin, honestly, after hearing you say that, I have more respect for the fanatic settlers in Hebron than I do for you. Because at least that particular piece of land is special for them. Whether I believe them or not, they claim that that piece of land is special for them. For you, you're just interested in your privilege, to be the ruling class. And it could be anywhere. I mean, if Herzl had established a Jewish state in Argentina and you were privileged, you would be happy. So I think people like that might leave. I mean, they say that up to 1 million white South Africans left because they could not tolerate to live in South Africa without their special privileges. But I think the majority of Israeli Jews would probably stay. You may not know that the vast majority of Israeli Jews are actually of Arab origin. And so the end of Zionism offers an opportunity for us collectively to regain our Arab Jewish heritage. Because one of the things Zionism did is cut Arabs off from their Jewish brothers and sisters and their Jewish heritage. So I think the Arab Jews will stay, and with time they might reintegrate into the Arab world, and we can move beyond this disgusting racial binary that Zionism has created. None of these inconveniences, if they exist, are excuses for apartheid or ethnic cleansing. I mean, having Little League practice on Saturday is not a good enough reason to, you know, put 1.5 million people in a giant concentration camp called Gaza. So, sure, there would be, yes, it would require a lot, it would require change, it would require accommodating people who have been totally excluded. It would require making space for them and welcoming them back. Sure, it would be difficult, it would be very hard. But, I mean, this is also an outdated view of Zionism. I mean, it's the claim of Zionism that Jews need Israel. And the reality is, and has always been, that Jews don't need Israel. Israel needs Jews. It needs warm bodies to make up the numbers demographically. Now it needs Jews to make the case for the, you know, to justify the unjustifiable. So part of the strategy laid out by the Reut Institute is to, you know, to do even more to recruit Jewish communities to speak up for Israel. But what you find, at least anecdotally, I don't have numbers, but I travel to a lot of college campuses, and young American Jews, I find many of them, if not most, that I meet are more inspired by the universal ideals of justice that they grew up with in the civil rights era, and not very impressed with Zionism, which appeals to a sort of tribalism and a sense of victimhood and a sense of being, you know, beleaguered. They don't feel beleaguered because the fact is this country is very accommodating to Jews. It's very accommodating to a lot of people, but it's certainly been accommodating to Jews, and they've done very well here. And it's much safer to be a Jew in the United States than Israel. So with Israel, they make two sort of mutually exclusive claims, but we're supposed to believe them both at the same time. One is that Israel is a special haven, an insurance policy for Jews, that if there's another Holocaust in Canada or the United States or France, the Jews would be able to go to Israel and be safe. But at the same time, we're constantly told that Israel is always on the knife edge of destruction, from Saddam Hussein, from Hezbollah, from Ahmadinejad, from who knows where next, that it's always under threat. So at the same time, it's this safe haven. On the other hand, there's been a debate in Israel recently where Netanyahu wants to give the vote to Israeli Jews living abroad because he considers that they would be more right-wing and they would get more votes. Ehud Barak, who is the left-wing in Israel, so-called, said, no, only those who take the risk of living in Israel should get to vote here. So now thank you for admitting it, Ehud Barak, that if you're a Jew, you're much safer living in the United States, in Miami, or living in Montreal, than living in Israel. So whereas they may allow Palestinian citizens of Israel to vote, the Palestinian diaspora, including the direct relatives of Palestinian citizens of Israel, aren't entitled to citizenship. So citizenship in Israel is given to Jews. Palestinian citizens of Israel are an exception, where because they were there, they had to give them a form of second-class citizenship. But essentially, it would be a limitless franchise for Jews and a very limited franchise for non-Jewish citizens.
As an Israeli, I think you oversimplify the situation by disregarding the segmentation or fragmentation of both Israeli society and probably the Palestinian society, which is the PLO in the West Bank, you have the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, you have Palestinians in Jordan, and so on. And in Israel itself, you have very right-wing, orthodox people that believe in the entire Eretz Israel, like you said, and so on. So with the disengagement, there was actually people afraid of civil war within Jewish population in Israel. So I think the analogy of South Africa is sort of oversimplification, because I'm not sure it would pass even within Israeli internal conflict without even talking about the conflicts and internal conflicts within Palestinian society. So how would you address that point?
Well, I don't see the basis for internal Palestinian conflict. Yes, there is a factional conflict for which Palestinians bear responsibility, but there's also a great share of responsibility borne by external actors, who have deliberately fomented and fueled it and actually forbidden Palestinian national unity. The United States has made it a condition of support for the so-called Palestinian Authority that there be no national unity government. So you have to take into account very significant external factors there. And occupation always produces, a class of people who benefit from it and who are willing to collaborate with it. And that was also true in South Africa. You had tremendous violence between the supporters of the ANC and the Inkatha Freedom Movement, which in a sense mirrors the divisions among Palestinians. And also that was used as a pretext by the apartheid regime to say, look, the blacks are murdering each other. Black on black violence is much worse than anything else. And if we're the only thing keeping them apart. If we give up power, it will be a slaughter, and most of the victims will be black. So we heard that. Civil war, we also heard that in South Africa. You might remember the Afrikaner Weerstandbeweging, the Afrikaner resistance movement, and the predictions that there would be holdouts who would commit massacres and so on. And they fizzled because I think, like the most extreme elements in Israel, they don't really have an independent power base. Their power base is the regime.